When I used to hear people say things like the media is brainwashing the masses, I used to not only think that this was a gross exaggeration, but I thought that this was some sort of conspiratorial, conspiracy theory sort of mentality, right? Some QAnon, some Blue Anon, that sort of individual, the tinfoil hat sort of conversation. I couldn't for the life of me fathom that these legacy news outlets or the mass mainstream media was actually a propaganda machine. It wasn't actually until probably 2015 to 2016 when I realized just how deep this rabbit hole truly goes. Now, times before that, I had dabbled in some conspiratorial sort of things, but I was always back and forth, right? I got exposed to a documentary known as The Zeitgeist when I was around 15 years old, and that kind of cracked that open for me, but still, I had this tug and pull. I couldn't allow myself to accept that there were those out there who had these nefarious sort of ways about how they were engaging with the public, let alone those who are in such powerful positions, those who had grown to trust, who have known to trust. I mean, it's kind of like figuring out that a parent or a family member that you're so close to has been lying to you your entire life about everything. And not only that, but they've been lying to you in order to have power over you, to assert their dominance over you. You know what I mean? We are raised on these television shows. We're raised, well, I guess for the digital natives, the Gen Z, you're raised with these influencers or these pundits or whatever it may be, social commenters, individuals like myself. And to think that your entire life, these individuals have been intentionally and consciously brainwashing you, that takes a whole lot of that takes a dark night of the soul sort of experience, where you have to accept the truth for what it truly is, a Neo in the Matrix sort of moment when you accept the red pill as opposed to the blue. And so it was during 2016 where I started to make this true transition. And obviously, what happened at this time? Well, we were introduced, or at least reintroduced, to a character known as Donald J. Trump. Now, prior to 2016, this was a man who was pretty neutral in the media. I mean, maybe had his controversies here or there as far as just, what he had said on The Apprentice on that evening show, or, maybe some of the things in which he had been engaged in, allegedly, was he not, tabloid sort of stuff, not reality. But oftentimes this was a man who was pretty liked in the industry, more specifically in the hip hop space, which I was engaged in. I mean, as a kid, I loved hip hop. And so I would hear DJT, aka Donald Django Trump's name mentioned in a multitude of songs. He was a man who was looked up to. He was seen as an aspirational figure within the hip hop community. And so it was mind blowing to me to figure out that this man who was either neutral or beloved by some was all of a sudden public enemy number one. For me to see that this man had all of a sudden become some sort of demonized, some sort of slandered figure, really had me digging deep. Because at first, I wasn't fully accepting it, right? I was in a perfect position in my life where, again, I was ready to accept more truth. I was in a place where I was trusting certain institutions less and less, right? I was taking my own health into my own hands, trusting, the general medical system less. I was trusting big food less and, starting to change the way I ate and things of that nature, starting to do deeper research for myself. It was around the age of 18, 19, 20. So, I'm now stepping into adulthood, and I had really had to decide, who am I going to be? What is my identity apart from, who my parents are or my lineage or the environment around me? And so during that time, it was just a perfect recipe or perfect storm where all of a sudden I'm now seeing this full-blown onslaught of the media going at a man who days before, let alone, months before, they were loving. I mean, they couldn't get enough of. His name would stay in the headlines. Oh, he opened this building. He did this thing. Oh, he is, multi-billionaire. Donald Trump says blah, 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 right? He was standing next to the very same figures who in the next breath would be calling him a racist, a fascist, a sexist, etc. And so, during that time, during that political campaign, I do remember certain clips being used, certain moments, I guess, whether it was at rallies, he was giving different speeches, whatever it may have been, debates, where they would essentially take clips and use those as headlines, use those as, his main talking points. So, for example, there was the Fine People, which is now known as the Fine People hoax, right? The Fine People sort of praising of the white supremacists, where in essence, the media, aka the propaganda machine, was purporting that he called white supremacists fine people. Now, for most people who did not actually tune into the entirety of that segment or that rally or wherever it was that he was giving this speech, would have thought to themselves, oh my God, why would this man be praising white supremacists if he was not one or not in support of them? Oh my God, the news is telling me this. This must be true. And again, this is before the legacy media took a complete nosedive. People were beginning to lose trust, but not in the extent that we would see, a decade later. So this was the first moment where I was like, okay, this is actually ridiculous. It's all over the news. Everybody's talking about it. This man is being demonized more and more by the day. People who once had no opinion about him have a very strong opinion. And that made me doubtful because I have a contrarian spirit. And so I started to dive deeper and deeper into the subject matter. And I found myself essentially, let's just say, stumbling upon the simple truth. And all it took was for 15 seconds of me watching a clip. That's it. I just watched the totality of what he said, not according to the mashups of the public or the mass media, the legacy mainstream media, but instead, private citizens, everyday people, what we now know as YouTubers, individuals like myself. And so I tuned in, I watched something that didn't have this bias pull, and I saw a very short clip of Trump saying, unlike the white supremacists. He wasn't even mentioning, as a matter of fact, he rejected the white supremacists in that moment. And yet the media took that and spun the narrative to he had actually endorsed these individuals. And so that was a moment for me, folks. That was a moment for me. Because I couldn't unsee what I saw, right? Before, I just had speculation. Before, it was just conspiracy. Before, it was just, a story like the JFK story, the 9/11 story, etc. It's all speculation. It's all likely propaganda. This is individuals wearing tinfoil hats who are spreading this type of information. But now, I was just seeing what I was seeing. And mind you, this is before AI deepfakes, or at least allegedly, right? But this was before any of these sort of technologies. That was him saying exactly what he said. And there were multitudes of people sharing these types of stories. And so I started to go down that rabbit hole and started to see that there were other things I didn't even know the media was using as spin that he had actually never said, right? Oh, saying that all people coming over the border were, criminals and rapists and murderers. Turns out that the man never said that. Turns out that he was saying that there are some of these types of people who are coming over that border. Something which was never controversial before he said it. I mean, Barack sent back close to 5 million of these individuals back to where once they came. Bill Clinton, upwards to 12 million, they say. I mean, these are staggering record numbers. So a man who only sent back 1 million in his first term is now being demonized. And again, I had seen nothing yet, because this was still that first segment of him getting into politics. Now, mind you, this is a man who had never been in the political arena. This is a man who was never in the political sphere. And I didn't understand how deep that deep state truly was. I didn't understand how deep those tentacles truly went as far as, this enmeshment within Washington, D.C., let alone how they feared this man because he was not a part of their own system. And so for a young, quote unquote, black man like myself, there was a plan for me. According to the mainstream media, they had a strategy for me. In order to keep me on the Democratic plantation, they were going to spin a narrative that this man hated black people. Now, again, this is a man who was awarded by the NAACP, standing next to the likes of a Rosa Parks and a Muhammad Ali and a Jesse Jackson and the Al Sharptons. These individuals had nothing but love for DJT when he was on the Democratic plantation. But as soon as he became a Republican and a renegade Republican, because this ain't necessarily a partisan thing, You had Republicans that were deeply afraid of this man messing up their money or messing up their power dynamics, the things that they had, quote unquote, worked so hard to create, to foster, right? I'm introducing my fiance to what's it called, House of Cards, just to show her, like, man, how real this dynamic was. This is a show I watched way back, not understanding that 99% is quite accurate. Now, mind you, I'm not in support of a man named Kevin Spacey, but it's a hell of a show, and it does show a reality as far as how the political game is played. And so again, I'm at a place where I'm not understanding that this is truly an attack from the inside, not just meaning the random media looking for clicks and views, but there's a machine behind it that is connected to DC, that is connected to everybody else who has been benefiting off of that, political regime, that far leftist propaganda machine. And so once my eyes are open, obviously I'm seeing what I'm seeing now. I wasn't at a place where I was even willing to vote for somebody, right? By 2016, I still had a little bit of the Obama fever, right? You're black, therefore you should be voting for Obama. And so, I thought to myself, well, I can't just abandon this entire ship, even though I was questioning everything. I was questioning my entire reality. I was, what is real, what is not, etc., which I think is a healthy place to be. I would never consider myself a loyalist to just one side just because, right? I registered as a Republican this year for the first time, or at least 2024, to just register as a Republican. I wasn't registered as a Democrat before. I wouldn't necessarily give myself over to a party unless I really believed in what that platform was representing at that time in history. And I'll revoke that as quick as I did it. Right? We should always be skeptical. We should always be asking questions. We should always be at least thinking for ourselves, at the very least, at the foundation. But I digress. So we got to a place where essentially we were brainwashed as a collective to hate a man who essentially was looking to do more good, again, relatively, which I guess unfortunately means very little, right? All he had to do was actually just care to, put Americans' needs first in order to be massive good, which is like the basic fundamentals that a government is supposed to do for its own, to protect its own, to protect the borders of its own, to, take care of the economic interests of its own. That's just the foundation of this. You understand me? So my brother used to say, these are the basics, honey. These are the basics. And so here we are, fast forward, not only one term later, but now in the second term. And we are now getting to see just how deep this political propaganda machine went. We are at a place where the man nearly had his life taken from him, and there's still those who are questioning whether or not he actually even gives a damn about the American people. But again, that's how the propaganda machine works. It's kind of like being in a relationship and, you've sacrificed yourself quite literally. You have actually taken a bullet for the person that you love, and they question you. Do you even love me? Do you even care about me? Do I even mean anything to you? And you're like, I almost got murked. They almost took my life for you. What? And yet the man, he doesn't go on about it, right? He's on the mission that he's on, doing what is necessary in order to correct the things that unfortunately have been burdened, to unburden us from the things that we have been burdened by the individuals who purported to care so much for individuals who look like myself. We are the party for black people. We are the party for the minority. We are the party for the disenfranchised and the marginalized, when in reality, they were the party of the elite. They were the party of the establishment, the party of the corrupt deep state machine. This has been nothing but a strategy, a psyop, as they call it. Again, psychological operation. This is how programming works. And, I love to get into cults and things of that nature. Not love to get into cults as far as joining the cults, but I love to get into information as far as, what makes people join a cult? Like, how do people fall into that sort of deep trance where they can be disillusioned to believe that this thing is the best thing for them? These people care for them so much. This leader, this charismatic leader, is some deity that has been sent from above in order to save, this collective of individuals. What would have a person who is rational minded otherwise, an individual who may be intellectual competent otherwise, right? if a person is maybe deeply, severely mentally ill, which a lot of the far left is, and this is according to, actual research, a person outside of that, how do they fall into that type of propaganda? How do they fall into that? Well, if you have any sort of chink in your armor, right? If you have any sort of gap where you have a need for validation, for acceptance, approval, whatever it is, it makes you more susceptible. And a lot of individuals who fall into this, again, I was a part of I might still be a part of some type of propaganda machine. That's why I'm always checking myself to make sure I'm not falling into a cult ideology. But, I can at least check myself enough to say, okay, I'm being a little too biased in this. I'm being a little too this on that. Some things I won't even speak on now until they unfold. They fully unravel themselves. There are issues politically where I just chose I'm not going to get into it until it shows itself. And then I can say, oh, that was corruption or that wasn't corruption. That was genuine. That was not genuine. Right. But outside of that, I'm seeing things pretty clearly. And I see that this is a propaganda strategy or a full-blown propaganda campaign that mimics that of when a cult is looking to recruit individuals, right? They look to create this sense of belonging, acceptance, and us versus them, and a complete and absolute allegiance to them. That's why the left continues to lose and lose and lose, because, they consume their own, and they really don't have an own. You have to be a perfect cog in their machine. Every belief has to be exact same. Like if you hold 9 of the 10 beliefs that they hold as their 10 commandments, the 10 commandments of woke, if one of them is missing, then you are seen as a heretic, right? You are seen as an apostate, as it may be in like religious circles. So if you have 9 out of 10, then you are ostracized. And this happens to people every single day. Maybe they don't want kids being put on the blockers. They don't want kids being mutilated, whatever it is, right? Kids at these, whatever it is, inappropriate shows that they're taking kids. You might just have that one thing that you're not into, but you're with everything else, and you are immediately seen as a outsider. You are, ostracized. You are disassociated, as they would say in the JW. So when you are given over to that mentality, brainwashing works in a way where it's like a parasite that attaches itself to your thinking, your feeling, your actions. You don't even know that something is acting on your behalf, right? You are the host of this parasite that is essentially moving for you. It is, it's kind of like if you see one of these alien sort of movies or whatever, or even maybe better off, a vampire movie, right? When the symbiote takes you over, or maybe the Venom movies, if y'all are Marvel fans, the Venom, symbiote that takes over, and it is literally consuming the mind of an otherwise seemingly sane individual. And so that is, again, the intention. That is the brainwashing that is taking place, where an individual who is literally looking to help, I'm not saying they're perfect. No man among us is perfect, right? We do our best to be as perfected as we can. We do our best to show up as righteous and upright and upstanding as we can. But, the person who is the most likely to actually care about you is the one being presented to you as the danger and the threat. This existential crisis. Oh, this man is the greatest threat to democracy, when in truth, this is the only man amongst them who is actually caring to preserve your democracy. Oh, this man is looking to, tear apart the fabric and the fiber of society. Oh, he's a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a misogynist, a this or that. When, if you actually look at the reality, this is a man who has pulled together demographics who otherwise would have never came together. On the outside, I used to think MAGA was some sort of cult movement. I was like, oh, these are the red hat people. And I was afraid to even engage because I saw what kind of ridicule that you got. Shout out to the brave folks who were, early adapters, right? But then there came a time when I realized, wait, these are all kinds of different people. This isn't a religion. This is a movement, right? There's disagreements. There's fractions. There's sectors. There's people who believe 2 completely opposing ideas that would almost seem contradictory on a platform, and yet they're able to at least come together just for one foundational thing, which is we want what is best for ourselves, our neighbors. We want what is best for our community. Take care of us, and then we can get to everybody else. Simple.
I used to be afraid of the dark, place unknown like a heart in their heart. I used to see my life in the bar. Now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2 step in the daytime. You just know when it feel right. You got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 365, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up. You know them constellations. Constantly gazing